I'm wrapping up the 2024 Deep Sea Journey Foundation interview season with two of my very favorite people. As we head into the holidays, this will be my last interview for 2024. I hold them in such high regard in the world of patient advocacy. And that's the topic we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about patient advocacy, patient engagement. What value does that hold in healthcare? And, I think of words like empowerment, education, support, navigation, finding your voice. These two lovely ladies, I have met one in person, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves shortly, but I'll call them by name as I'm speaking here. It was a little over a year ago that I was so very fortunate to meet in person Marie, and she will introduce herself in just a moment. We're talking across continents today. Marie is in Ireland, and then there's my neighbor up in Canada, Sue, who will introduce herself shortly. And I have found she's been in my hometown of Seattle. So I'm not going to let her get away with coming to Seattle again without sharing a good cup of Seattle coffee with me in a lovely bookstore. And you'll find out why in just a minute. But with that, the three of us have been engaged in patient advocacy for a collective number of years. So I'm excited to speak with them today, and I know you're going to enjoy this conversation. It holds great value for many. So, with that, Marie Ennis O'Connor, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for having me. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm so honored to be here on your last podcast of the year, but also to be on a call with Sue, who is somebody that I have admired for many years and look up to. So I'm very excited to be on this call with both of you. I want to just begin, I guess, by just explaining a little bit about my journey to patient advocacy. And it's a pinch me moment when I think that it actually began 20 years ago with the diagnosis of breast cancer. And of course, I didn't know that 20 years later, I'd still be advocating. I didn't know that I'd be on a call like this. But that's what happens. We find when we're diagnosed with a serious illness, something's missing. And we look around, we see who can fix this. And I'm trying to remember the quote. There is a quote about, I discovered the person who could fix it was me. And not necessarily that I could fix it, but that I had to do what I could to make things better for other young women, as I was at the time diagnosed with breast cancer, and at the time diagnosed with the disease that was very much postmenopausal. Female, I know more than females get breast cancer, but at the time, very much that postmenopausal female disease. And I didn't fit anywhere. I was in a small corner of Ireland, and I just had absolutely no idea where I would find answers to questions that were very specific to me as a young woman who had hopes and dreams of becoming a mother, things like that. So that was my path to patient advocacy. And as I said, I didn't know I'd be doing it 20 years later, but here we are. And I'm very grateful, obviously, to be here 20 years later, but also grateful that this path has brought people like you and like Sue and others into my path.
I'm glad you stayed on this path, Marie. You have graced us with so much information. You really are my go-to educational forum that I seek on social media. But there's another one who does this in my realm and graces me with her education and inspiration. Sue, will you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on this call. It's so cool. We're so international, the three of us
I
coming from
know.
three different countries. But we also have so much in common, which is, and I know that we have breast cancer in common, which is like kind of a crappy thing to have in common. So that my patient experience was started with a breast cancer diagnosis 7 years ago. But I join you, Marie, in the 20 years. Somebody should be giving us pins or little coins, or something to commemorate that. Is that my son, Aaron, who was born with Down syndrome, is now 21 years old. So I would say I started on my healthcare advocacy journey when he was about 2 years old. I first joined a council as a family member, as a carer, a caregiver, and became very immersed in the whole idea of what we used to call patient and family-centered care. And certainly it's evolved since then as a roller coaster, which I know we're going to talk about today. So progress doesn't always go up, I've realized as time goes by. Um, I, what else could I say? I am also grateful to Maria for, I love giving a shout out because she has consistently highlighted and shared patient stories on various social media sites on the internet. And you're really the only one that continues to do that, Marie. I have to say that so much of this is fleeting. And so I've been very fortunate. I've had some of my essays featured on journeying beyond breast cancer. So I really do appreciate the compilation that you do every week, because there's very few places where we can go to share our stories. And I'm happy to be on the podcast to do that today. So it started with Aaron 21 years ago. So I have been doing this for 20 years. I'm tired. But we also have lots of wisdom if we've been around for this long. So I'm appreciative of being asked about it. And I've written a couple of books. One is called Bird's Eye View, which is about the patient experience, both in pediatric healthcare with Aaron and then my breast cancer experience. And the second one's called Ducks in a Row, and it's about health system change. So I'm excited to touch on some of those topics today. So thank you. I think that's it for me. I'm in Vancouver, just outside Vancouver, Canada. That's where I'm located.
Right. My neighbor up north.
Right, Seattle. And yeah, I'm told we went down there for a film fest and we were in and out. I know, Terry, and I didn't, you saw that I was there. Next time I'm going to say I'm coming somewhere and then, or prearrange to meet people before I go.
Oddly enough, Sue, I think that's how we connected via our first Zoom meetup, because I saw something that you were in Seattle. I'm like, wait a minute,
I know.
that's the Sue Robbins that was here. So we'll make that connection next time.
Yes, next time. And yeah, I have family down in the States, so we do come down to visit. And it's not very far. It's only 2 hours. It's only a 2-hour drive, depending on the border.
Or 2 hours north for me. So there you go.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And Ireland, I've got such a soft spot for Ireland, Marie, from visits there. What part of Ireland are you from? Sorry, I'm asking the questions now, but. Oh, wait. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
My goodness, how did that happen? I'm from Dublin, but my heart is in the west of Ireland. So the west, the beautiful wild Atlantic way just calls to me. So we must organize something. We definitely will. I have some ideas, but this is for a discussion for another day. And this is what happens when you get three women together who admire each other and who have circled around each other online. We're excited to be here, and let's get the conversation.
Let's go.
I'm going to start with the questions, and I hope that the listeners see this camaraderie, because this is what patient advocacy should look like. I'll just leave it at that. I have good friends. I'm in good company today.
I love that.
Question for Marie. Are organizations truly understanding the value of patient engagement?
Well, I have to take a sigh here, because I have been in this space that working with industry around patient engagement. It's called lots of different names: patient engagement, patient centricity. And I've seen this as a hotly debated topic. And Sue said earlier, I'm tired. I'm tired as well. I'm tired of still trying to talk about the value of patient engagement. I can't believe we're still talking about it. So, look, many organizations will say that they value patient engagement, but we know that their actions don't always reflect this. And I'm not saying that it's from any place of bad will. Sometimes it's just carelessness. There's really this gap between rhetoric and reality. And a lot of organizations adopt the language of patient engagement, but they have never really grasped its core principles. And so when that happens, what we see, I'm sure that Sue will agree with me as well, and you as well, Terry, what we see then is that they hold tokenistic activities like a single focus group, just one, to tick a box, but they fail to integrate the patient perspective that they have invited to the table into actual decision making.
That ticking the box rings true so many times, I think.
Mhm.
So what does it look like then if an organization truly engages and embraces patient engagement? What does a success look like?
And so I actually can say what success looks like it because for a brief moment, well, work with an organization. I can't mention their name, but they were up in Canada actually, but that's all I'm going to say. And it was an incredible experience. I saw what it was like to see it done well. And the person who spearheaded it actually left industry. And once they left, then everything collapsed. But let me talk about what it looked like when it was working well.
Mhm.
What happened was that the organization put patient engagement, and I know we can call it many different names, but just for the sake of I'll just call it patient engagement for now. So they had a very strategic understanding, and they didn't just talk about seeing patients as partners, they really walked that walk. And they understood this need to move away from transactional models, and that is that one-off piece where you take what you need, and I put need in inverted commas, where you take what you need from the patient partner, but you embrace a more relational approach, and that's one built on mutual respect over a longer term. And actually, I'm now really good friends with that industry partner. We've maintained that mutual respect outside of our working relationship when she's left now. So at the highest level, patient engagement is embedded in the organizational culture. It's not just a department, it's not just a one-off initiative, it's actually a core value that informs all activities. That's what it looks like when it's done really well.
You used a very strong word, respect.
Yeah.
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 So how can we begin to bridge? How can organizations begin to bridge this gap, Marie?
And so I was speaking just before we came on that my internet might go a little bit funny for me. So I just missed that question. Terry, could you repeat it, please?
Sure. Yes, because I know it's storm season. We're calm today, but it's stormy over in Ireland, so I'm
It
happy
is.
to repeat. Um, how can organizations then, you spoke beautifully about a success story. How can they begin to start to bridge the gap and create more meaningful patient engagement?
And one of the first things, and I alluded to it just a few moments ago as well, is the biggest obstacle to meaningful engagement is siloing. So different departments within an organization will have perhaps varying levels of patient engagement. So for instance, a research team might actively involve patients in clinical trial protocols, co-developing even. But then the marketing department mightn't even consider patient perspectives when developing educational materials. And so you can imagine the mixed message that is sending to patient partners. obstacle is resources, because meaningful engagement requires dedicated resources, including staff time, staff training, and financial support. And unfortunately, many organizations lack the infrastructure to support ongoing patient engagement activities. So this makes it difficult to sustain momentum and achieve long-term impact. So the biggest mistake is to think you're doing patient engagement because you've done one project, but meaningful patient engagement is over that longer term.
So I know that organizations have to measure success, right? So how do they actually measure the impact? Because everybody wants to see that, they measure their impact in different ways. Can you speak to us about that, Marie?
Sure. I mean, measuring impact is a challenge, and not every organization does it. And again, just to repeat myself, the problem is that the ROI, to use that marketing term, of patient engagement is difficult to quantify because its effects sometimes are long term, but also they are maybe a little bit more qualitative than quantitative. So it's not always as simple as drawing a straight line between patient input and a specific outcome. And so I guess, like everything, the first place to start is by defining clear objectives and then developing a comprehensive measurement framework that outlines, I guess, those key metrics. I feel like I'm being very marketing here, to track progress and evaluate impact. But I guess what I really want to say is the important thing is that it needs to be measured over the longer term, not just focusing on short-term impact. Because patient engagement, we know, can have a ripple effect that unfolds over time. So it's important to capture that long-term impact.
It is, and I think industry, when you are dealing with any industry or organizations, you have to talk, and this becomes challenging for advocates. You have to talk sometimes in marketing terms. But I have to tell you, most recently, and I think Sue's going to address this in just a moment with her storytelling expertise. But I have to tell you, very recently, I witnessed what I would call a soft ROI. I had a community event, and sometimes in my world, I know we each do kind of different and unique things, but focused on patient engagement, patient education, patient empowerment. And I had a small community gathering here in Seattle. And I invited each of the attendees to tell their story. And one of them brought me literally to tears that day, because what she said was, I was told by a particular healthcare provider, I'm going to generalize here, that this is what I should do. This is what they can offer for me, and this is what I should do. And she said, I went back. I'm not ingratiating myself because we each do this. We each have this effect on the people that we have chosen to serve. But she said to me, I went back and listened to the video that you and your surgeon did together about using your voice, about owning what it is that is important to you. And I went back and listened to that. And I told this person, I cannot come to you because this is not what is best for me. And I found a new person. Again, I'm generalizing. I found a new person who could provide that care for me. That's one story of success. Now, as you move through this space over the years, you collect those soft ROIs. You collect those stories of success. And that's when you know you're making an impact, and what you're doing in patient advocacy with those that you work with is making a difference. I thought of that, and I just interjected that into our conversation and our questions that we're moving forward through. But here's another one. It's rather important. and I'm going to field this to Marie, are we as patient advocates, are we doing enough to demonstrate our value and expertise? How can we communicate that ROI? And let's roll in the question about our credentialing, our CVs, our advocacy credentialing.
And I know Sue is going to have a lot to say on this topic as well.
Yes.
It's an uncomfortable question to answer because it's almost like, why should we have to prove our ROI? And yet, if we want a seat at the table, we do need to put ourselves out there. It's a mutual thing, though. I do think that I guess we're using that word ROI. So here's another awful marketing speak one, our value proposition. But maybe it's about thinking. I don't necessarily believe that it's up to us to prove anything. But if we think about how we might want a seat at the table, maybe we need to start thinking a little bit about where's that space we can both meet. So industry, I'm going to say industry because I actually work with industry. I know Sue has worked with more in hospitals and that setting, and I've worked more with industry. So if I just talk about industry, I mean, they have a bottom line, but where can their bottom line and what I want as well, where can that meet? So maybe that's a little bit around that. I love to tell the story about, I was going to ask you, have you ever heard about inhaled insulin?
No, I haven't.
No, and there's a reason for that. So it was meant to revolutionize diabetes treatment by offering insulin via inhalation instead of injection, but it failed spectacularly because patients just simply found the device was too cumbersome. And so as a result, the pharmaceutical company behind it had to withdraw it. And this blows my mind. It incurred a staggering 2.8 billion loss. So I'm thinking about how the first thing to get cut in industry is patient engagement. And yet I'm also thinking about how little that would cost when you put it against billion loss. So I'm wondering if we need to gather those stories together and keep hammering those home, because I think that's a pretty incredible loss. And I think it's about knowing our value. If it's knowing our value, even in those economic terms. That's maybe something, although I feel so uncomfortable. I'm going to have to bring Sue in here just to shut this conversation down because I feel so uncomfortable even having to talk about our value because we are inherently valuable.
It's a beautiful segue into Sue's work. So I'm going to direct my conversation to you for a moment, Sue, and I'd like for you to tell me how you guide patient storytellers to be selective and at the same time communicate with organizations to create these trauma-informed spaces for us. Share some, again, like Marie, share some specific examples, both good and bad.
Yeah, storytelling. So that's certainly something that lights me up, I have to say, and probably because I'm a writer by profession. It's kind of a spoiler. I was in nursing school for 2 years and I ended up dropping out and getting an English degree with a Shakespeare concentration, which you're like, what does that have to do with healthcare? Well, it's got everything to do with healthcare. I find out so long in my career because, as Marie said, healthcare relies a lot on the data and the research and the numbers and the quantitative information, and really what the unique value add that us patients bring are our stories. And so I always say that as a former breast cancer patient, I communicate about my experience in stories. I don't come with some graphs and numbers and research. That's not how regular old patients talk. We talk as far as storytelling. So I think a lot of patient engagement, I kind of don't work with organizations where I have to sell it because it doesn't work. Like if they don't have the recognition that it's important to bring the patient voice into their org, then I don't even bother anymore because it's a dead end. Like I'm not going to sell you on this idea if you don't believe in it. So even folks who believe in it a bit, often we can start with stories. So they seem to understand, I think, because there's a narrative medicine movement that talks about healthcare professionals sharing their stories, with Rita Sharon at Columbia University's been spearheading that. And I've noticed since the pandemic began, staff are coming and sharing stories more. And part of that has to do with their morale problems, and they're struggling with well-being. And what I try to say is, well, patients have stories too. In fact, that's how we communicate about our experience. But we need, so I'm getting to your question. I'm getting to your question, Terry. So we need to help organizations create safe spaces for patients to share stories. So whether that's, so I work a lot clinically, so operationally in hospitals, like Maria mentioned. So, but you can apply anything I say to other sectors too. So at point of care, you know, how much shared decision making is really going on if we don't feel seen or heard with our clinician. And then you could kind of, I have this little diagram of patient engagement. So you can move up to, like, when you have, perhaps you have to escalate something because you're not happy with point of care, like who you share your story when you're talking to the manager. And then maybe you go into a formal complaint, so-called complaint, which I like to call feedback, where you go through patient relations and you share your story there. And then some of us get, where I've been pretty stuck for the past few years, get stuck in organizational engagement. So when Aaron was born, I joined every council, every committee, everything that was out there as far as pediatric healthcare. I think trying to change the world. When I realized the only thing I can really change is myself. I think I've come upon that realization, whether I accept it or not. But and so, but what I brought to the table when I was invited to those tables was my story. But there's been many examples of how I've been treated well with my story, and they've been safe spaces. And sadly, I've got I've got some neutral ones where everything was fine, like whatever, I didn't have much feedback. But I also have some very negative examples where I think patients get trotted in, told to tell their sob story, and then dismissed. Yeah. And that feels, like you said, a tick box or check box. We call it in Canada. It's funny. Other places call it a tick box. It feels like that. It actually, if I could say this, I've been married for a long time, but it feels like a one-night stand. It feels like you're totally been used and then thrown out the door in the morning. Like that's what it feels like. And there's nothing worse than that. So yeah, organizations need to understand how to create these safe spaces for storytellers. And part of that is trauma informed. And part of it is being grief informed too, because often patients come with a whole boatload of grief that has been a result of their patient experience in that particular facility. So I'm happy to share examples if you want me to dish a little bit, but I won't share names, of course, but generally when things have gone bad and when they've gone well.
I think it's important that we do that today, Sue, but I want to interject something really quick.
Sure.
That there's a word that's almost a trigger for me, and it's hero. In the realm of storytelling, and I have disengaged after an invitation to engage with a particular industry when their ask was, we want that hero story.
Oh, yeah.
And I had to stop and take a breath and look at them and say, none of us wanted to be a hero. We want to work to make things better. I'll leave it at that. Now, I think it's important today. How do we really bring our message home to both patient advocates and industry and organizations today in our conversation if we don't share the good, the bad, and the ugly? With
I always talk about that.
With Marie's word, respect.
With respect.
Right.
Can I, sorry, Sue, just for one second.
No, do it. Let's have a convo. That's good.
Let's have a convo. Let's throw the script out the window. Let's throw the script out the window.
Fireside chat.
Saying that, Maria. Oh, I can't believe you're saying that, Marie. That's okay. Let's go.
This is major. Let's throw the script out.
Okay.
So with this industry partner that I worked with, I think that level of story was where that respect came from. So I remember one of the first talks that I ever did with them was, I said, "Hi, I'm Marie. I'm your patient story." And, it was like, I've been invited to be your patient story, but I'm not here. I'm sick of being your patient story. I mean, I will share my story with you, but I don't want this to be that story that you've just, oh, lovely, here she is. She's telling her
Mhm.
sad story.
Yeah.
And yet, check the check box. I want you to really listen to my story and to really see those parts of that story that are hard for me to say,
Mm.
and that I've been doing it a long time, and I'm still vulnerable, and I'm vulnerable, and I want you to respect that. But I also
Right.
want you to see maybe where it's also your story, because I want us to meet
Mm.
on the level of story. And so the story I was telling was my story of infertility. I don't know why I lowered my voice there, but it still hurts. It's still a hard story for me to tell. And you asked me to stand on a stage and to bare my soul about something that's deeply personal that sometimes I haven't even spoken. Haven't even spoken to my family. They won't listen to this, so I can say that. I have never even
Mm.
shared it with my family how deeply wounding that wound is. And yet I'm
Mm.
standing on a stage full of these people being your story at the start. But what really struck me and why I just wanted to share this was that afterwards, people came up to me from that industry event and said, "That's my story too."
Right. Yeah.
And that, that's my story too. And I had given them permission
Right.
to be open and honest with me. And I
Yeah.
think that's what really deepened my connection with that organization.
Mm-hmm.
So I just
Hmm.
wanted to say that everything is about story. It's
Yes. Yeah.
that's where I think there is that wonderful saying, and again, my poor menopause brain, but is it Muriel? Sue, you might be able to help me here as well. It's like the world isn't made of atoms; it's made of story, and I think
Mm.
story is just so fundamental,
Oh,
and that's
yeah.
where we meet each other at that point of story. And so
Yeah.
it's about reminding our partners when they invite us. It's about not just trotting our story out and going and saying, listen, this is very hard for me. And I need you to
Right.
really recognize that and respect that.
Right. Yeah.
And now I have
I,
to hand back over to Sue. But
no,
again,
so many things are just like ping ponging off. The vulnerability is such a big part of it. It's so funny because I spoke to a staff meeting of a regulatory body yesterday about patient engagement, and I said, from my perspective, I don't speak for all patients. I never represent. I don't believe in that one person can speak. But I'd say generally, there's a few things in what you said, Marie, that I told them was that somebody wise told me once, I don't expect you to understand what I've been through, but I do expect you to respect me. So there's a
mm,
difference between the two. So I might not understand what your experience with infertility is, Marie, because I have not experienced that myself and I couldn't necessarily imagine it, right? Like walk in your shoes. But I can acknowledge that you have that story. And even though I might have a different story, it's okay that they're different. And I think that health professionals, sometimes they struggle with that empathy thing because they can't imagine. So if you can't be empathetic and you can't understand, at the least you can do is respect that we have different stories. I think that that's an important part of it. But on one hand, we want to be colleagues and I want to be treated as a colleague if I'm around the table. But on the other hand, I also want you to understand that I'm here from a place of vulnerability and grief and pain. And the fact that you stand up on stage, I always say, like, how could you not have the utmost respect for patients who get, like, if we're using the stage example, so I get behind a podium, I got a microphone in front of me, and I talk about the most difficult moment of my life. And I'm honest about it. And that's why I think people like talks by patients, because we're not just reading bullets off a slide from a mission statement, right? Like we're actually talking about real life. And so what happened to you after your talk, Marie, is that people saw themselves reflected in your story. And so, from a storyteller's perspective, there's two main successes of stories. One, people see themselves reflected and they're like, yes, I feel a connection. I've experienced this. I felt this. And on the other hand, because we can't feel and understand everything, is that they're surprised. So we might tell them something new about what is important to us in healthcare that they had never thought about before because they have not been a patient in the way that we've been patients. So that whole, I always say, I think Gaping Void, which does these little cute
Oh,
cartoons, these corporate
yes.
cartoons, says, touch hearts, change minds.
Yeah.
So really, I think healthcare has an imbalance. They've got way too much of the left brain stuff going on, the data and the research evidence. I believe in all that. I'm not saying I don't believe in evidence-based healthcare, but what we've forgotten is the human part,
Yeah.
and staff and leaders and patients, we all come with a story. So when I work with an organization who is interested in safe spaces for storytelling, what I start with is their staff, and I try to create a space where they can share their stories. So if we start talking about reflective practice and the hard things that happen in their life and what attracted them to healthcare to begin with, and often that comes with a very personal story. And I put up a screen of like books and movies and TV shows that are about healthcare to try to say, this is how we share, like, this is how we connect. And then they talk about what their favorite book was about healthcare. And so really seeing that we have more in common than we have difference, I think is a really powerful thing. Cause I'm like, we're only stronger together. Like that's just a fact. But okay, so I'm going to take a little pause here, but I'll give you some examples. So I've had great experiences speaking with this one particular health discipline. And I can say the reason that is because the organizer, he thought about what I needed and asked me what I needed, which is like most of it's just about asking us what we need, not making assumptions, because they're killers, really, if you make assumptions. But we need prep like beforehand, and some of us prep more than others. Like I happen to need a lot of prep, even though I've been doing this forever. So I need to meet and understand, who the audience is. What's the 3 key messages? What's the takeaway you want? I always ask those same questions, right? During the session, I need to be taken care of. And it doesn't mean I'm a princess and I have a rider in my contract and all that. But yeah, it'd be nice if somebody greeted me or told me where to park, right? And then greeted me at the door. And then I get there early, make sure the tech all works and all that type of thing. And so he made sure that happened too. And then afterwards, he checked in on me and made sure that I was both right afterwards. And then, a couple of days later, he checked in how I was feeling. Did I have any feedback about the experience to make it better? And so to me, that was almost a perfect experience. And I've, I don't know, I haven't had it that many times. I can tell you, I've had so many terrible speaking engagements where I've tried to go, I've gone through, I've met with so I'll tell you an example of one, and it was with emergency department. I'm just telling you that because this will make sense if you've ever had an emergency department. There are different kind of staff, I think, that work there in some ways. So I came into an emergency department. I was the patient speaker, and I was at the back of the room, and they had somebody, it was a hematologist that was up to tell, and he told a joke about someone who had made a suicide attempt and come to emergency, and the whole audience started laughing. And you know what? I should have got up and left at that point. I should have just like ditched the whole thing. Like, but I had traveled there, and and you feel obliged and stuff. And I thought, this is like you talk about, I always say, watch for the red flags. That was definitely a red flag, but it was a bit too late for me. So I ended up getting on stage and talking about kindness. And I was talking about, could we make emergency departments more welcoming to people instead of like the stop sign and the parking that it's hard to figure out how to pay for it. And, all these barriers and there's security guards standing there right before we get into emergency. I said, we might be less agitated and easier to work with if we could make emergency more welcoming. Well, they did not like that one bit. There was a gentleman, I could tell he was all agitated. It's so funny when you're up on stage, they don't realize I can see them. Like even if there's lights in my eyes, I can still see. So I can tell who's agitated. Sure enough, he puts up his hand, and it's a man. And he's like, I'm a nurse and I used to work in the military. And I thought, oh, I am in so much trouble. Now I could feel all the color drain out of my face. I'm like, and my moderator who I'd worked with, the organizer, was not strong. So he should have stepped up at that point and kind of like mitigated the question a bit. But he said, you patients, all you want is hotel service. You come in here and you expect to be treated, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and then it was like a mob mentality. So once he said that, somebody else got up and said a similar thing. And then one nurse got up and said, if patients treat me like shit, I just treat them like shit back at them. And I'm like, oh my God, like what kind of work environment are you people working in? Like, and it just totally fell apart from there. And I basically had to get ushered off the stage. Like, I wish they had thrown a coat over me, taken me off the stage, and I was crying in the hall afterwards. I'm giving you the absolute worst experience, but there's so many lessons in that about how that space wasn't safe for me. And my biggest one that I should have heard when I met with the organizer was someone had recommended me and heard me talk to a group of administrators, the exact kind of talk, same talk about emergency department experience. And they said the audience needs to hear your story. They didn't want to hear my story and they weren't ready for my story. And nobody like set the stage for my story. That guy with the bad joke about someone who attempted suicide before me. And so obviously it was not in alignment. So if we're not in alignment with what the organizers actually want and what we're willing to give, it's just going to go all to, sorry, I swore, Terry, I realized, but
I
we can
raised
probably,
2 boys. I live in a house of
okay,
men.
okay, sorry. Yeah,
I don't
you gotta put E on
I
this.
don't believe things that,
Explicit.
but
Okay,
I
so that's
think
my,
I
I have
have to.
so many ones too. I don't even want it, but it was like we organizers and us, and you can say no. I guess that's a big thing when I talk to patients. I say
Mm,
we often feel obliged that if we don't do it, nobody's gonna like all this kind of stuff, and it's our big chance, you know. But if you feel your spidey sense tingling in any way, then you should say no. And it takes a lot of guts to say no, and people get mad at you when you say no too. That's what I realized. Like you know, and so if you're a people pleaser like me and you were raised to be a good girl and well behaved and
Yes,
all that kind
yes.
of, it's easy to say no, but there are ramifications for it too. So anyways, I just wanted to, we got to take back, we got to grab our power. We have to steal our power back, especially as women, I
Yeah.
think, in these kinds of places. So that's
I,
my, I've got other ones too, but anyways, I'll just leave it at that. But
I'm sure Terry wants to come in, but I just really need to come in here because I think that this also ties back with that patient engagement piece because it's all in a
mm-hmm.
continuum. I saw something about it was some incredible, I don't know, was it Dawn Richards or was some other incredible Canadian patient advocate who had said something about, are you ready for me to be there? Are you ready to hear what I
mm,
have to say? And I think
right.
this also ties in, whether it's a conference
Mm-hmm.
or it's an ad board with a pharmaceutical company or it's a project, whatever it is. Why am I here? And I'm not just here to be the patient story. I remember hearing a story before about somebody saying, "Oh, we've got to get diabetes patients in here or people with diabetes. And what kind
Yeah.
of patient do we need?" It was like, the diabetes patient. It doesn't matter. Anyone, pick anyone. Anyone will do. It's the patient. And so that's so wrong. So what do you need? And am I right? Am I the right person to be on that
Mm,
stage or to be
mm-hmm.
in your ad board? And I think that we need to get, maybe to go back to your question, Terry, it's not that we need to prove ourselves or prove our ROI, but we need to get better at saying no and at
Our
knowing the
worth.
right situations for us to be in. And can we contribute? And I'm very happy to say I'm not the right person for this, but I'd love you to meet Sue or Terry or somebody else. And ideally, somebody that isn't the usual suspect, somebody whose voice you haven't heard a million times before. So I think that's where we need to get better as patient advocates, is in building out that pool and knowing when to say no and knowing when somebody else would be a better fit. And now I will let poor Terry to come back into the
no, I mean,
conversation. It's running away. It's like a runaway train, Terry.
well, once
You
in a
and I
while,
are,
Catch us.
the
once in
inmates
a
have taken
while,
over.
I'm looking at my facial expression. I'm looking at both of you, but once in a while I glance at myself and I have this kind of emotional anguish a time or two when I'm catching myself. It's so interesting. I think in the space of conferencing or in
Mm,
the space of being an invited speaker, um, there, you know, when events are planned, I don't care if you are a single planner or you are a enormous conference, planning something. it's difficult. Let's just face it. There's so many moving parts. There's so many things that can go wrong. Like you said, technology, the parking, what time am I supposed to be there? How long do I have? There's all of those things. And all three of us have been through that. But for new advocates coming into this space, I hope they're listening to this, and I hope they take time to learn how to do this properly. I had a very interesting thing happen to me, if I might share it.
Yes,
And it
please.
was
Yeah.
at the same conference. Same conference. I had the good and the bad. And with the best of intentions, they invited me. I hope it was the best of intentions, although when I asked them who invited me, they couldn't tell me. That in and of itself, just like, what?
Wow.
Am I the box you ticked off?
Right.
Gonna bring it down. But with the best of intentions, they invited me to speak as an advocate among other, I'm going to use general terms here too and be respectful, among other healthcare professionals. And every person on the panel, with the exception of me, their name was pronounced properly by the moderator. Simple, right?
Yeah.
I have a 2-syllable name. I used to teach my kindergarten students on the first day of class how to say my name, and they nailed it every time. So right out of the blocks, in my presentation, I said my name, but nobody got it right. And that hurt. Then I thought, okay. So then I thought, at least I'll go and I'll get my speaker badge. I'll be known as a speaker. I'm a patient advocate. I'm not one of the others. They were out of speaker badges.
Oh, gosh.
Strike 2. But let's go to the good side now. Where I saw true value is when I had individual professionals at this conference come up to me and sat with me, not for 10, not for 15, not for 20 minutes. They pulled me aside into a quiet area, and we sat and had meaningful conversations for at least an hour. And they said to me, why aren't we having more patients on panels? Because you are full of resources that we need. So there was that. And then I had a complete moment of vulnerability, and I'm grabbing my phone for a reason. I went into a session one morning. I was exhausted from travel. Everybody gets exhausted. I don't care if it just is. People come from all over the country to these conferences. I was exhausted. I was dehydrated. And I went to one of the finest sessions that I attended at that conference because they talked about the entire spectrum of how they deal with patients from diagnosis to preparation for surgery to recovery. And I'm like, wow, this is powerful. And as I was sitting there, one of the presenters pulled up a slide that showed my organization and my Facebook page. And I had no knowledge that was going to happen. So it was a surprise to me. And then I thought to myself, they showed my private Facebook group. And then I thought to myself, they're talking about what I do every day. And I pulled my phone up while I was sitting in the audience, and I pulled my Facebook group up, and I started looking at the comments and the concerns and the support they were giving each other. And I started to get very emotional, vulnerable. Brene Brown's favorite word.
Yes.
Then they asked people to take the mic. You know, there's always that segment at a conference, take the mic. And I thought, I need to stand up. Because to back up, when the slide came up of my private Facebook group, the surgeon presenting, again, I had no knowledge of this. They didn't even know I was going to be at that session. He looked into the audience and he says, by the way, I'm really glad you're in attendance today. Did you see everything that's happening to me? So I got up and I took the mic afterwards and I said, thank you. Thank you for the recognition.
Yeah.
Respect, right?
Yeah.
And then I looked at my phone and I just choked up and I said, can I share with you in real time what's happening right now in this group that you just mentioned? And I pulled up a couple of stories. I made no mention of names, but I pulled up a couple of stories of women who were so concerned about what they were going to tell their family and their children about recovery. And I was very emotional. And of course, I always apologize. You know, people, I think an automatic response is, I'm sorry I got choked up, or I'm sorry I started crying. And I did. I said, I'm sorry, I'm emotional. I think I'm just tired, dehydrated. So they thanked me for getting up. They went back to their presentation. And they were all chatting on their panel. And one of the lead presenters got off of the stage. I'm going back to what you said a minute ago, Sue. Checking in, got off of the stage and came down to my seat where I was sitting in the audience and handed me a fresh glass of water. That seems so simple, doesn't it? And yet I saw him later that evening and I said to him, I said, I had a moment today. He goes, do not apologize for 1 minute for your emotions. He said, we have got to work together. We have got to work together to solve these problems. And he said, I was just glad you were there. That is a very fresh moment in my mind that just happened recently. And both of those things happened at the same conference. So I don't know how that dichotomy happens in a 48-hour period, but it did to me. And I hope that advocates are listening to this. I hope industry is listening to this. I hope healthcare is listening to this, knowing that we can be vulnerable with each other. We can acknowledge, we can respect, and we can show all of those things to improve what all of us are doing. Not just improve patient outcomes, improve healthcare, fill gaps.
Staff too. I mean, staff well-being, patient well-being is intertwined. How can it not be? So, you know what I find, sorry, Terry, that was a beautiful story and so well articulated. Okay, I'll take a breath because I talk too fast. I think what you talked about was, I think part of this is the small kindnesses, which I talk about at point of care a lot, right? How they mean a lot. You're lost in the hall. Somebody helps you find your clinic. They smile at you. They're not just looking at their phones, the staff, as they're walking through the hall. What you talked about that panel member coming up afterwards with a glass of water, that's a kindness, right? That they demonstrate. That was like, kindnesses are a way to show you're compassionate, right? Like it's an actual action. So that glass of water and coming to you was an action. And so I think patients, we ask for the same thing at point of care, right? When we go through. So it's the same principles. It's not actually that hard. But the other things you talked about, these so-called small things, you know, whatever the tag, they didn't have a tag for you, mispronouncing your name. They're actually not small things because I call it death by 1,000 cuts. Like those little things, they add up. And we're also very vigilant. I think I find myself very vigilant in any kind of healthcare environment, including conferences. And I'm like hyper alert. And I think part of it is because of my experiences in healthcare. Like I'm actually like, how brave are we? I'm going to say it. for us to get up and do something we're so scared of. Like that's courage, right? I get every time I go up to speak, or I'm on even on a call to speak, I'm like, I'm all nervous. I'm like, why did I
Yeah.
sign up for this? This is stupid. What have I done myself? 20 years I've been doing this, and I
Yeah.
still feel that anxiety. And I'm trying to reframe it as excitement, but no, it's mostly anxiety because I'm talking to a group of people who have caused me harm in my life,
Yeah.
whether it's not directly the people, like
Yeah.
it wasn't actually my breast cancer surgeon who's sitting in the audience, but it's a representation of people
Yeah.
who I know, and so how brave is that to get up and talk about something I talk about like not having a hospital gown when I talked to students about this last week during my mammogram, and who made the policy decision that, and I'm standing half naked in the middle of a mammogram room because they won't give me a gown. Like we talk about that, especially if you had breast cancer, there's so
Yeah.
many aspects of that are very intimate things, and we get up and we bare our souls so that things can be better for people behind us. And also, I find with storytelling, it does help heal me a little bit. If someone gives me a microphone, I'm like, finally, nobody ever listens to me or sees me when I'm at point of care, when I'm sitting in the room.
Yeah.
But now I can talk in front of an audience. So there is an element of ego there too. It's not totally altruistic because finally I get a chance to speak. But I just, what you're talking about, Terry, is like, it takes so much bravery for us to do that, and I want us to acknowledge that with each other, and how I think they forget that conference organizers or committee people, they think we're just showing up for work, and it's not like that at all, because my professional is personal and vice versa. And okay, one other point I want to say about emotion. I worked in a children's hospital doing engagement for many years, 2 different hospitals, and I can remember a story that was told at a staff meeting because a group of therapists had gone up north to do outreach to visit a young child who had a bad accident and was in a wheelchair. And they came into the house with their checklist of things they wanted to talk to the family about, I don't know, ramps and goals and all that kind of stuff when you get a home visit. So they walked in and they sat down with this mom, and she started crying. I don't know, for lots of reasons, I'm sure. Like she's had a big change in her life and she's suddenly a caregiver of a disabled child. Like there's lots of reasons why. But the staff were so uncomfortable with it, they actually got up and left. They didn't know what to do because they had their little tick mark and she had gone off of that because she was emotional. And it made me realize in the staff conversation how uncomfortable healthcare professionals are with emotion. Both us as patients and them. Because when I was in nursing, we weren't supposed to show any emotion. We weren't supposed to feel anything. I don't know what you do with it. You know what ends up happening? People burn out. They burn out not because they're compassionate and they feel for their pain. They burn out because they keep stuffing down all that emotion, all that trauma, all that terrible stuff they've seen over the years. And so that's how they end up burning out, is because they end up numbing that pain because they're not able to express how they feel about emotion. I think I love talking about the core of things. You can tell I've been in therapy ever since I had breast cancer, I started therapy. But it's like, I think at the core of it is that health professionals do not get taught or trained or encouraged in their practice to be comfortable with emotions. And as Rita Sharon says, she says, do not turn away from the suffering. And I think a lot of healthcare professionals, that's how they get through day to day, is by, their employers don't give them time or the ability to acknowledge suffering. And so they do turn away from it. So anyways, that emotion is a very big part of the work we do. And we absolutely should not apologize. Somebody told me once, walk in like you're the freaking queen. And I try to do that, but then I kind of then I hear my mother's voice. I don't think she'll be listening to this. My mother's voice, like negative in my head, and I just kind of all fall apart. But I come in with that intention because what we're doing is so brave.
Yeah. Nobody's ever said that before, Sue, to me, that what I'm doing is brave. And I just want to thank you for saying that, because I feel seen and heard. And if anybody, Terry keeps saying, I hope advocates are listening to this. And I don't know about you, Terry, or you, Sue. I often get asked, how do you do what you're doing? How did you get to be you?
Yeah, I get asked that. Yeah.
It's like, little by little by little, but I never set out to be this. And I really appreciate both Sue and Terry sharing their moments of vulnerability, because it is still so personal for us. It is still, we are still vulnerable. And
Mhm.
I don't know who's looking out for us. Nobody really. And so I really want to acknowledge that. And maybe this is a discussion that we could have offline. And maybe this is something that we need to talk about, is how do we look out for each other? Because it seems,
Mhm.
I feel like we're real lone wolves still. We're
Mhm.
still on our own going to these conferences. We're still on our
Yes.
own standing on that stage. We climb down off the stage, get on our car, get on our plane, go home on our
Yeah.
own. So maybe
Right.
there's something missing. And if anybody's listening to this, I was trying to add up in my mind, we have at least 50 years probably experience
Yeah.
collectively of doing
Yeah.
it. It's a long time. It's a long time. And yet it's still raw and emotional and vulnerable for us. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
As
I
it should
was
be. We're not robots. We're not robots. And that's the authenticity that we bring. That's what we bring. Sorry, Terry.
no, I just I couldn't believe after doing this for so many years how vulnerable I became
Mm.
in that
Yeah,
moment. And that was just this year. And
right.
I think some of it too, I'm just going to say, I think some of it too was a touch of PTSD because
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I haven't dealt with. I'm going to just say it up front. I haven't
Mm-hmm.
dealt with enough in my life. And I've noticed that sometimes it does bubble up sometimes. And I think there was
Mm-hmm.
a touch of that. But how,
Mm-hmm.
how is it that we have become so polite in our delivery? Where do we all say to each other, you know, it's okay if you tell me you've had a bad day. I understand you. And then
Mm-hmm.
say, I mean, maybe we need some important words like, I'm really glad you told me that today. But I
Mm-hmm.
really, let's put it in a clinic setting, because as we're talking about the breast cancer space, that's what we're all three familiar
Mm-hmm.
with, although we've dealt with other healthcare issues. Um, do we have touch words? Do we, you know, train healthcare professionals to say things like, I'm so glad you shared that with me today. I haven't had the best day myself. It's important
Mm.
to be vulnerable with each other sometimes. But I have to tell you, let's move on with your consult now. Thank you so much for sharing your story, but we've got to get on with your consult. Just the
Mm-hmm.
acknowledgement, the sheer
Right.
acknowledgement, not brushing it off like, mm, got another one
Yeah.
coming in the
Hand on
door
the
short.
door when they hold
Yeah,
their hand on the door and they're on
exactly.
there's like any questions and the hands on the door. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, I get it. You're not making the, okay. So I just want to say something. I believe, because I talk about kindness a lot. I get people in the audience, physicians. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for it. I talked to a bunch of pharmacy students. I was talking about, doing chit chat and maybe getting to know a patient a little bit, just my little Sue stuff that I talk about. And I was in the bathroom after. Which never go to the washroom after you do a talk, because they were all talking about me at the sink. It was a bunch of email, and they're like, all that stuff she was talking about, we don't have time for that. So I hear this all the time, that they're terrified of our emotions because they think, this is what they think, the lid's going to come off the Pandora's
Yes.
box, and they'll be sitting there for 5 hours, which they don't have. They only have 3.33 minutes in Canada. They put them through so fast. They've got 3 appointments every 10 minutes for specialists, that they don't have time for that, which is true.
Yeah.
I know that they don't have time, and, they're not comfortable. They're not taught in mental health. They don't even, so they're really worried. But for the most part, there's been research, real data. There's a book called Compassionomics that I always bring with me, and I bring the data with me. And it says that actually it's called Compassionomics. It's a great book. It's
Mm.
an environmental scan of all the data around compassion in healthcare. They say that in order to show understanding in an outpatient clinic, there's a study that was done. It takes 35.9 seconds. That's what it takes.
Wow.
So it actually, I push back when they say I don't have time for it, because do you have time to deal with a complaint later? Do you have time to deal with me when I show up at emergency department later because you haven't listened or heard me when I've been in this initial appointment? Like a lot of this other stuff, do you have time to deal with a college complaint because I go to the college because you're such a jerk to me? Like, really, sorry, I'm just like being honest. Like, they have a hard time thinking longer term, right? This is a preventative action. Never mind the morality of it, that you should be kind to suffering people. Oh my God, I can't believe I have to explain that. But if you want to look at the numbers, it actually doesn't. So how long did it take for that panel member to come bring you a glass of water? Like really? Like even
30
that
seconds,
one,
yeah.
yes, yeah, 3 minutes. Like, so
Or less.
there's a misconception
Yes.
that if you ask patients how they're feeling, that it's going to take more time. And I just want to tell a little tiny story. I know we're talking about point of care, but I remember when Aaron, I've got this beautiful story in one of my books called About Dr. Darwish, which is I read often about kindness. When we first met Aaron's pediatrician when he was about 2 months old, he was just diagnosed with Down syndrome. Anyways, one of the things she asked me, we'd seen a lot of specialists beforehand. Nobody held him. Nobody said, you have a beautiful baby. She did all that. Like she did that. I didn't take more time. And I'll never, ever, this was 21 years ago. And I will never forget this. Like we don't forget, especially at time of diagnosis. I can talk to moms who have kids in their 40s. They remember it like it was, because it's PTSD, Terry.
Yes.
It is medical PTSD. It is embedded in our heads. Like I can remember when my doctor brought up the idea of Down syndrome, what shoes he was wearing and what that room smelled like.
Yes.
And that is a stress response. I felt like I
Yes.
was floating over my body. Like it was like, so we actually don't forget these things. But the one thing Dr. Darwish said was, she said, how are you feeling about Aaron's diagnosis? Like, and we didn't go on and on and on about it. Like we were kind of fresh. It wasn't, but just even her acknowledging that and asking that question, which we probably didn't even answer properly, was like 30 seconds. So I just think this idea I think healthcare professionals are afraid of emotion in any way, shape, or form. And I'm actually tired I'll bring it back to engagement. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to show up in my corporate suit. I don't even do that anymore. Sometimes I come in my jeans. Like I want to be a person. I'm not a corporate person. Like I think my value is my authenticity. And believe me, not everyone likes it. And I'm not going to be asked to every single conference, because a lot of conferences want yes men at their conference. They want people to sit there, agree with everyone on panel. I actually don't do that, because that's not me. If other people can do that, that's fine. But I think bringing our real selves, but knowing, okay, so I'm hoping to get into your next question, Terry, knowing we're going to miss out on opportunities because of that. I think that's a hard pill to swallow too, because this work, in my experience, I might be known in Canada because I'm such a big mouth online, whatever, and I've been doing it forever. I can't make a living at doing this. I can't. And even asking to get paid is still controversial at a conference, which is like ludicrous to me. The amount of value and wisdom that us patients, and speaking of which, like, remember, Brene Brown also says, you go back and read, we are bad asses. Like we're the ones in the arena. She's got that great metaphor from Roosevelt. She talks about, if you're standing in the arena, like, and you're not in the arena with me, you're not allowed to criticize me, because I'm standing in the arena when I'm doing. And so I think of that before I go on a talk, and it actually kind of emboldens me a little bit, but not everyone likes it. Believe me, a lot of people want the checkmark people, and I'm not your gal then. And so I don't make a living at this. It's part-time at best. Like, and I have to beg for money every time. Luckily, I get my husband to do the negotiating.
Well,
It's terrible. I bring out my man. Like, it's terrible. Like, some of this is female. I don't think we know our own value either. I'm very uncomfortable with that.
yeah, and this whole payment thing is very complex too. And I think in the US, at least what I've seen with advocates, is they find channels to fund going to conferences so that they can have a voice and be a voice. And some of them do. Of course, I run a nonprofit. I'm grateful to, in as much as running a nonprofit, which is a business, I'm grateful that I have built it up over the years so that it allows me to make choices which conferences I attend. I don't just go because I want a selfie with someone. No,
Sorry.
thank you. No,
Yeah.
thank you. I
Yeah.
am way
Be
over
picky.
that.
Be picky. You're
Be
picky. There.
picky.
Yeah.
Plan
That's a
before
good
you
one.
go to a conference. Find out what's going on there. Schedule who you are going to talk to. Reach out to them if you can ahead of time. You might not get all of those things done, but you come back feeling like you have received some ROI from your investment in
Right.
your
That's a
work.
good point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I've
Yeah.
learned that over the years. So that would be my sage advice to any advocates listening. And listen, you know, I think there are time when conference planners, different ones, it just varies. It just varies really.
Mhm.
But I think there are certain conference planners who think, well, we're not going to invite a patient because they're going to expect their hotel, their flights, their meals, and all of that. They're going to expect that to be paid for. We don't pay for our speakers to come. They're doing
Mhm.
it, because they're wanting to engage and show off all, you know, don't not ask us because of that reason. And geez, maybe you can offer us a little compensation. What's wrong with that? I don't think patient advocates should start out of the blocks going, oh, they want my story. I'll find any way I can to get there.
Mm.
Then you go
Yeah.
down the dark
I
rabbit
used to be
hole.
like that. Yes, I used to be like that. Yeah,
Exactly.
you learn
Exactly.
to. You're like a little puppy dog, right? Oh my gosh,
Exactly.
like they've been, and still even it's so rare that I get asked. I still have a feeling of that, but it's like I be picky is like I hope we can end on some positive things like and owning our own power, which I think
Mm-hmm.
I was at a conference last. It was with a whole bunch of creatives, and they had five speakers, and three of them were men. I'm going to be gender specific, and they got up and said, when you're asking for your rate that you charge, like you're the expert. You should walk in there like you're the expert. And that's how they all started was I, and how often do we do that? Like I feel like I have a hard time with that because I already come from a place of vulnerability, but asking like that whole you are the queen thing, like I think taking back, but the only way we can do that is if we kind of decide to do it together. Because if I'm the only one doing that as a speaker and no one else is, everyone else is like, oh, I'll volunteer. Thank you for asking me. And I'm asking, what is your budget for speakers? Like that doesn't help our cause, like generally. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get a whole bunch of like, sorry, retired, upper middle class, highly educated ladies. Those are the
Mm-hmm.
folks that come in to give their talk. You're never going to get diversity unless you offer compensation. Like that is
Mm-hmm.
just, and I find, and I am part of that privilege. Like I'm not, I'll never be retired. Like, oh my God, I'm going to work till the day I die. But it's like, so I just think it's really important. That money thing, which everyone's very uncomfortable talking about, is that if we believe that we offer value, sometimes I have a fee and they don't even blink an eye. And we're like, oh, maybe you should have asked for more. We need to talk to each other behind the scenes, how much we charge for, say, a plenary talk or a
Mm-hmm.
panel talk or all that kind of stuff. So we actually know because when we're all siloed, like we talked
Yeah.
about before, and segregated like this, doesn't it's like it keeps us kind of weak, right? Actually, I
Mm-hmm.
don't think whoever they are, they don't want us to organize because if we organize some sort of union kind of thing,
I've
Yeah.
like there
often
would be
thought about that
power. I know, like I'd love, so offline we should, if
offline.
nothing else, yeah, I hope that your listeners are like, yeah, what I do does have value. And in fact, sorry, I can say this. We are usually the most interesting speaker of the entire conference because we're talking about human stuff. We're not reading our freaking bullets off the slide. So sorry, I've got to think about that. But, we're actually talking about the human experience of healthcare. And I believe all those people in the audience are human too. And that's
Mm-hmm.
how you touch them and connect with them. Not everyone likes it, like I said, but the few champions that do, I think that's where the progress is. So, anyways, that's the
Sue,
end of my
would
rant.
you say
Or
again,
let-
this is a very actionable statement for patient
Yes.
advocates listening, but also
Yes.
for conference people. Would you say again, what is your budget? What did you just say a
Yes.
minute ago? That is a
What is
powerful
your
question.
budget for speakers? If they ask me to be a
Simple.
speaker, yeah, what is your budget? Because like other speakers, especially plenary ones, they charge 10, 12, $15,000. Some of these big conferences, especially the physician conferences, they bring in the astronauts, the Olympians. Like those people aren't charging $250. Like they are actually charging like a lot of money. And we tailor our talks to them too. Like a lot of these talks these plenary gives, they're just the same talk they give to everybody, right? And they get paid all this money. So yeah, I think if people, I think we need to start understand. I mean, I'm not saying that there's so much power at play here, and the conference organizers have all the power, and we kind of need to grab it. I guess that's what it is. But I think if we kind of do it together collectively, feels a lot better than us doing it individually. Because I kind of feel that Brené Brown shame thing. It's like, how dare I ask for $2,000 for a talk? There, I said a number. Like honestly, and we have to stop like doing this all in secret. I think the more we talk about it openly, the better, because folks behind us, everyone thinks I work full time at this. I totally don't. People contact me and go, how do I become like you?
Yes.
I'm kind of like, I don't know. You put in your time. It's relationship based. So lots of it's unpaid. Like nobody's going to pay me to go for coffee with people, So I just think, I don't know. I think we could teach a lot of other folks like about some of the stumbles that we've had. And so hopefully this podcast has helped for that. You are a badass. And how brave are we to get up and talk about our most vulnerable stories? Like we're amazing. We're incredible.
Love it. I'm coming to Sue the next time I have to speak.
Yes.
And I know
I'll give you a pep talk.
Thank you. I've actually reached the stage where I'm over conferences, and I'm tired. I just feel like it's I'm over it, and so that's made it much easier for me to quote a ridiculous number because I don't care.
You don't care.
Invite me. I don't care if you give it to me. Great, I'll get my game face on. But if you don't, I've actually reached. But again, you use that word, Sue, privilege. I'm now in a privileged position that I can do that because I've had to stop consultancy. I still do consultancy work, but I've had to leave this and go back into full-time employment because, as Sue said, you cannot make a living out of this.
Marie, like who was like, you're known all over the world. I don't know, if people paid us for reputation, we'd be doing pretty good, right? But
we would.
How to monetize it, like I don't think the market is there. They're not ready for us. Can I say this to all three of us? We are ahead. And so we're so far ahead in the way that we're thinking about engagement and community engagement and outreach and like all this kind of stuff, that they're over here and we're way over it. And so there's a few champions that see the value in it, but they're not caught up yet. And they probably never will be. And I learned something.
I don't think so.
I learned something from a climate change talk I went to last week. And they said, because they're like, oh, how do you guys still do your marches and your demonstrations and against the climate crisis? And we live somewhere there's a big pipeline being built and blah, blah, blah. It's just awful. Anyways, because we know this is the end of the world. Like, sorry. Like, I mean, it's like almost hopeless, right? Like, but they still show up and they still demonstrate. And they said they see it as generational. So if we can see our work as we're planting seeds to pass on to the generation behind us, because we might not see any change in our lifetime, especially now that I'm getting older. In fact, things have gotten worse since the pandemic. If we talk about compassion, engagement and stuff, I believe that we're at a low point now. But if we're passing it along and it's generational work, like Audre Lorde, who wrote the Cancer Journals, like she died a long time ago, but she still informs the work that I do, and then I can pass it on to. So there's such a relief to think that, and it is not our responsibility to change the world. As I talked to my therapist about, all we can change is ourselves. And so valuing our own selves, that's a real brave thing to do in your late 50s. And I think, as we get older, maybe we don't give a heck, like you said, Marie, like whatever, if you don't want me, then it's your loss, actually. So,
and I think what you're saying,
late 50s, really, Sue.
Late 50s, yes.
Talk to me in a few years, okay?
Well, I'm in my late 50s. I'm a grandma. Hello. Yeah, I don't mind saying how old I am.
I'm not
I do the math.
I'm not in my late 50s, okay? I'm going to say that, and you can take that for whatever you want. It's my birthday month, and I have two grandkids, and screw age.
I'm doing
now
massive. Yeah.
There. Do I need to bleep that out on my own
You
podcast?
do. I think you do.
Yeah.
You know, to your point though, we could go on forever. We need to
We
schedule another
could.
podcast. But to your
We do.
point, both of you, what we hope to do, I can speak for all three of us. I had you both on for a reason.
Mm.
You know, you said earlier, Sue, we have walked the road. We have graced ourselves with honors because of our work, and we can own that. But what
Mhm.
our responsibility is to pass this on to a younger generation. And I do
Right.
hope they're listening. They have a different mindset. We all get that.
Mhm.
But what can they take from what we have learned as we have fallen flat on our faces on this road a few
Mhm.
times, picked ourselves up and dusted off the dirt and moved on. So
Mhm.
anyway. What I mean, I could sit here and say, what did we miss? And we could talk for another 3 hours. I'm going to wrap it up. And I'm going to say to both of you, thank you. Thank you so much for your friendship, first of all. Sue, you're going to come down here.
I am
Or
going to
I'm
come.
up
I
there.
know.
And
Got good coffee. There's good coffee
we're
there.
going to
Yeah.
sit together like Marie and I did in Dublin and have a cuppa.
Yeah.
I encourage others to do that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I just want to thank both of you for being friends, for being trusted friends, for being friends that I feel respected and heard, and for being on my podcast. It's just been delightful. I don't know what else to
Yes.
say. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Terry, for bringing us together.
Yeah.
What a gift this time has been.
Yeah,
Yeah, and did we
absolutely.
say at the beginning of this something about we need to wear buttons? I'm not kidding you. I did not set this up. This is a button I
What's that say?
have on my desk. It says shared decision
Oh,
making. Shall that be the topic of our next podcast?
ooh. I don't, yeah,
That's a
I
good
think it,
one. That's a
uh,
good
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that is a good one. And good
yeah.
luck trying to corral us into onto a script. I think we're going to go
We're so
rogue.
I
we
think
so
I'm
much
gonna
and then we
pack.
threw it out.
I think I'm gonna pack my microphone, and Sue, we're gonna head over to Dublin.
Oh,
And
that
Oh
would be
my
maybe,
God.
and
amazing.
then
Love
maybe
that so
we'll
much.
just go over to
We'll do our
Galway.
own, we'll do our
And
own conference
yes,
with the
and we'll
people
go,
we want
Yeah.
there. I'd
yes,
love
and
that.
Well,
we'll go
build
to,
our own table. Build our own table. I'm tired of
and
being
Yeah.
waited to sit at their stupid table.
Mm,
Sorry. We're gonna build our own.
I want to do that. I want to do
Yes.
that.
but can we go to the wild Irish coast and have some Galway oysters, please?
Galway, Galway.
The Galway's beautiful. The Wild Atlantic Way. Yes, I
Mhm.
think that's where we're going to have our next conference, our
When
own
where the
conference.
rain is horizontal, the rain is horizontal there.
Well,
Yes.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish you both the happiest of holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you for wrapping up my 2024 podcast and interview season with grace and fun and information. I love you both.
Oh, thank you,
Thank
Terry.
you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Terry.